All right, let's get started. Start with saying thank you to you guys for being here, and thank you to everyone watching this. So that would mean you are a HH insurance client, and so we appreciate your business. My name is Jake Holhouse. I am the CEO and founder of HH. And with us, we've got Glenn, who is a claims manager, and we've got Jeff, who is a licensed roofer and general contractor specializing in insurance claims. And today we really just kind of want to have a conversation talking about what do hurricane claims look like? What do good claims look like? What do bad claims look like? And how can people be more prepared for hurricane losses? And before we get started on that, the legal disclaimer is today is just general claims knowledge. Each claim stands on its own merits and is specific to that claim and that carrier's terms. Today is a general overview of the claim process and is not dialed into any specific claim or any specific carrier. So with that being said, we'll get started with Glenn and talk about water damage versus flood damage. What's the difference? And I'll kind of ask a second question on that is, a lot of people think of flooding as my roof comes off my house and water comes in. Can you kind of define, what that looks like from a homeowner's claim standpoint?
Sure. So definitely a good question, Jake. I imagine a lot of people have that question. The problem, I think, starts with, people hear water in their house, they see a ton of water, and they think my house is flooded. So I think some of the issues with those claims comes from how the claim is filed, whether it's done through virtual means or through a call-in. Good intentions, but I think that unfortunately the insurance space thinks a flood is very different. And I think that it requires the adjuster and the carriers to do a lot of vetting to make sure that they're properly delineating true flood versus my home is filled with water. So let's start with the non-flood loss first. When we think of water damage to a home, staying specific to cat, we think of, things like roofs, chimneys, skylights, stucco cracks. These are all ways for water to get into people's house, particularly when you have these heavy rain events, when you're getting multiple inches of water in a very short amount of time. So the way that insurance can quickly delineate it, and for our customers today, is you want to think, did it come in through the ground level? Or did it come in above the ground level? Now, obviously, I think everyone can paint a picture of some tricky scenarios there. You have sliding glass doors. Did it come through the top of the sliding glass door? Did it come through the base of that sliding glass door? And you can have many, many complications of that. But if we want to make that easy for everyone to understand today, ground level. So the ground is very saturated with heavy rain. Sometimes over a period of hours or, God forbid, days, you have that water coming into the house. When we think of traditional flood, I'd say sometimes there are lakes on properties. Sometimes there are large bodies of water in Florida. And those will overflow and ultimately lead to flooding of entire areas, which can affect people's house. That is what I would call the classic definition of flood. So when you're reporting a claim, sometimes you hear an adjuster say this is not a flooding claim. They're not trying to disrespect or insult you. They're just simply trying to say that's not sometimes what you're dealing with. You're dealing with more of the roof or those other issues I mentioned.
Yeah. So kind of simple explanation, right? If it comes from outside into the house from the street, right? I kind of call it from the ground into the house. That's a flood insurance claim. And flood is not covered under pretty much any standard homeowner's insurance policy. And if it comes from above and comes down, that's when you look to your homeowner's insurance.
I agree. That's a very good delineation. Yes.
And, Glenn, one of the questions we got, and I would ask you from your claims experience of different claims that you've seen is flood insurance worth it if I'm not in a flood zone?
Great question. And I can tell you two levels there. So I can tell you, number one, my house happens to not be in a flood zone. A little bit anecdotal, but I do opt to purchase flood insurance. And that's not really a pitch for flood insurance. What it's more a pitch for is do your due diligence. Make that decision at an individual home level. And we all know Florida's very flat. It's a fact. You'd rather pay something that's very affordable and that you can palate than be told, hey, I've got a large loss where my whole house is being gutted, the kind of nightmare scenario, and I didn't look into that cost. So I'd encourage everyone who's listening to this today, get a quote. If that's not a palatable cost for you, you weigh that risk. And we all know that times can be tough and this isn't you must get it. But I implore everyone to get that quote and really make that decision at an individual level.
Yeah, and I think from a rate perspective, right, it's typically $400 to $600 for that preferred zone flood, and so it's really not that expensive. And some of the worst claims that we've seen on it has been infrastructure failure, right? You get a sewage system backup, and that creates water in the street. Water in the street turns into water in your house, and that is flood as long as it's 2 consecutive homes or 2 acres of land, and so that's definitely one that we have seen as well. So this one, goes to Glenn and Jeff, and it is, what does replacement cost mean?
I can start on that one, Jeff. So replacement cost is kind of like it sounds like. It's the current value to replace damage. So when we think of replacement cost, we think of how much does it actually cost to put my roof on today? How much does it actually cost to replace a piece of contents? The current market value is a term that can get commingled there. But what we think of is, I'm not going to bring an actual cash value yet, but replacement cost, we think of today's dollars and what something is actually going to cost today. Jeff, if you want to supplement that.
From the contractor's perspective, straightforward. Whatever was damaged, what does it cost us today? Repair or replace it.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I think, one thing I'd throw in there is it's not enhanced replacement cost, right? I think that's where I've seen a lot of confusion on claims is somebody has, let's say, standard granite and they want upgraded quartz, right? And that's a huge difference. And, some carriers will allow you that, you can pay that difference on there. But within the policy, it's replacing with like, kind, and quality of what's already there, not an upgrade type policy. And so I think that's a big one on there. So another question that we got is, and this one is about flood, and I'll take this question is, can a garage and its contents be insured? So this is one that we had a lot during Helene and Milton, and that is where if it's, let's call it a barrier island type home, the new 3-story garage downstairs, 1 or 2 floors above it, that garage is basically exempt from coverage because you're not paying a rate for it. And so we had a lot of people that had, very expensive fishing equipment, golf clubs, anything along those lines that they stored in their garage, and then didn't have coverage. And so can it be insured? If it's an elevated home, there's really not a flood policy that covers that finished work or any contents that are below the base flood elevation and that type of risk. So next question to Glenn is, if my car is damaged under a carport, homeowners or auto insurance claim?
Definitely a good question. So to bring that back one level, often what you'll hear from people who work in insurance is there's very few redundancies in insurance. And what I mean by that is you're not going to often see your home covered under auto or your auto covered under home. So unfortunately, you may face a situation after a catastrophic event where you're filing a claim for your car and then you're filing a claim for your homeowners. I understand that can put stress. There's deductibles involved there. Limitations on coverage. But I think a common theme that you'll see in this conversation today is really having those conversations now during the downtime before storm season, making sure you're aware. And whoever submitted that question, I'm glad you did now because I think it's a really good opportunity to make sure that you have coverage like comprehensive on auto. I am not an auto expert, but I know enough that I've looked into this myself. So when you hear terms like comprehensive or collision, these are terms that I'd recommend you become familiar with because those will be very, very important whether you own a car or we have a lot of claims for golf carts. ATVs, other vehicles that sometimes face limitations within the standard homeowner policy.
Yeah, absolutely. So next question, and this is on flood as well, so I'll answer this one, is ground level foyer on the garage level, is it covered for flood? So this is a really interesting one where the building code allows for finish work below floodplain. I believe, Jeff, you might know this, it's like 300 square feet that somebody can finish for their foyer.
Okay.
But from a flood insurance perspective, that's still considered below elevation. So even though the building code allows it, if you do really nice drywall, we've had a lot of people do like the shiplap boards and things along those lines, and then they get flood water in there unfortunately is no coverage. And so those are always tough claims because the house is built to code. The policy is correct, but there's no coverage in the policy. Anything below that base flood elevation falls into self-insurance. So Glenn, this one is to you, is are my fence, screened enclosure, and pool cage covered like the house?
So again, a lot of these questions, I think they're really well considered, whoever's submitting these, but I think that that's one I'm going to break up into really two parts. So on the daily side, when I say daily, think of that as non-cat. So a non-cat claim, very few policies have restrictions around any of those items. Barring that a covered peril is another term I'll introduce. When we say peril in insurance space, we're talking about fire, wind, water, hurricane. Any type of peril is the type of damage. So on a daily non-hurricane, non-cat claim, non-catastrophe claim, very few restrictions on those. Now, at an individual level, you can opt to remove those coverages. You can remove things like other structures, which is what a fence would be. Some policies do define a pool enclosure as another structure. That can go both ways. I've seen it go both ways, but you can opt to remove that for a premium credit. By default, I would say wind is mostly the damage, or hail are two of the very common perils that damage those items, and they are covered. Now, where I don't want to get highly specific is some policies do have pool enclosure as a replacement cost coverage. Others have it as an actual cash value coverage. Actual cash value meaning it will lose value based on its age and condition. So a very mixed bag in terms of pool enclosure, and very carrier specific. I encourage you to look at your policy and speak with your agent, Jake, if you're with Jake, to make sure you're aware, because that can be a very enormous difference, particularly as your fence and pool cage age. But pointing to, I think this question was probably more cat specific.
Yeah.
And I can say on that front, pool enclosure is often a la carte coverage, meaning that you have to add it back because the base policy will often say pool enclosures are specifically not covered for hurricane damage. There are many carriers that will offer that back for an additional premium, but again, it will be very specific that it will only cover replacement cost or actual cash value. So whoever asked that great question, I really do encourage you to look at your policy specifically. Jake, I believe you might have mentioned one more item on there. You had said fences, pool enclosure, and
So it's screened enclosure and pool cage. So
okay,
kind of the same
so
thing
kind of
there.
the same thing. So yeah, I think I adequately answered that.
Yeah, and I think I'll add in there that, so I'd say probably 99% of the market excludes screened enclosures for hurricane losses. And one of the things that we see, and you might see this as well on the claim side, is, most of the time the carrier base limit is $10,000 when you do the add-on. Now, there are some screen enclosures that are $10,000. There are other ones that are 40 and 50. And so that is one that you just want to watch based on the size of that enclosure. So next question on here, Glenn, you're on the hot seat so far, is my boat covered under home, auto, or a separate policy?
Yeah, so I think this one, does translate well to a prior, answer I gave around cars. You're going to see very few redundancies in insurance. So if you have a boat beyond like a kayak, and I don't think that this was referring to kind of kayaks or small boats that you store in your garage, which those the policies generally have small amounts of limits for what I'd call like personal watercrafts. Sometimes they're as low as $500, those limits. I've seen some go up to $2,500. But if you're talking about a standalone boat, I think that if you're a customer of Jake and you're listening to this podcast, I'd really recommend you have that conversation, because that could be a very nasty experience to hear that after a catastrophic event, you don't have coverage for that. So very, very minimal coverage built into the homeowner policy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeff, next one to you is, you've done thousands of claims, right? And so you've done it from tarping to re-roofs, and then you also have, construction division that, does interior, rebuild work. Mm-hmm. You've seen probably really good claims, and you've seen some really bad claims. What do you see that a customer can do today to have a better claim experience if they have one in the future?
Absolutely. I think it starts with documentation, to revisit the replacement conversation we had at the beginning. So like, what was actually there? And it makes me think of, we had a claim we were working, a hurricane claim. They had a walkable surface on the rooftop with beautiful railing that went all the way around with a staircase that went up to it. Well, the problem was after the hurricane happened, all of that was gone. So, and not to be found. So it starts with documentation, right? So our job is to bring it back to pre-loss. And if you have good documentation, what kind of countertops do you have? In this example, it was this beautiful walkable surface and custom railing. Well, let's get good photos of it. So at least that's our starting point. And when you have it installed, keep your documentation. So that really helps us bring it back to pre-loss without having to guess or piece it back together. And sometimes it's gone. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the suggestion we typically have for people is, take a video of your house annually. One, the video is going to help you in a couple ways, right? It's going to help you on that dwelling part of your claim, but it's also the personal property, right? And so I can tell you that, you have a claim and you try to remember 6 weeks ago what all was in your house, you forget things. And by having that video, it just gives you that mental checklist back as to that list of items. And I think, Glenn, you probably experienced this, but when somebody has a really detailed Excel sheet, it's way easier to pay that claim compared to, I have no idea what was in my house, but can I get paid?
Yeah, no, and I think that Jeff and Jake, you guys both put that very well. I think that there are always different types of customers. There's the ones who want to be extremely diligent. They keep receipts for everything. They keep an Excel. They update it every quarter. There's the extreme, great, well prepared, awesome if you're like that. But if you want to establish, from this call, some what I'd call bare minimums, I think they painted a really good picture. I think a yearly video or a series of photos that you can back up. When you go through a big loss, which a lot of these catastrophe claims are going to be big losses, remember, you're going to have family that might be in the area going through it too. So there's going to be an emotional component, a human component, and your head's not going to be always in the game. The easier you can make it for yourself, I can tell you, speaking from every carrier I've worked with, we want to help you. When we're asking for documentation, it's not to spin your wheels. It's we want to get you back to pre-loss condition, and we want to make that easy. So when you have an Excel list that's highly detailed, it might sound crazy to prepare that without having a claim, but I can tell you, you're going to be very, very happy to have it when that loss does happen. And those ornamental handrails you're talking about are not easy to remember. You can see them, but what were they? Pictures can paint a really good picture.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one, and I think this one is probably all three of us, is what's the phone number and process to file a claim? I think what I'll say on that is, so on your declaration page that you get annually, it's got the claims phone number. So as a customer, you want to have that declaration page. What I always recommend is have it in your Gmail account. If you have it printed and you evacuate, you don't know if you're going to bring it with you. But if it's in your Gmail and an insurance folder, it's really easy to have, and that's really where I encourage to have that video as well. But I think one of the things that we've seen is a lot of carriers allow for app now, and so you can either do an app or a website and essentially skip the line, right? So you can sit on hold for 2 hours and go into a queue waiting for assignment to Jeff's team, or you can go on the app and not have to sit in the queue anymore. But what does that process look like for you guys?
Sure. So I think that, like Jake said, this one is highly carrier specific. So I don't want to sit here and go on the website, do this. But what I would say is that every carrier makes that process very visible online. So even a rudimentary search of whoever you might have will make that very easy. It's not a hidden process. And like Jake said, I think there's been an industry-wide pivot to either an app or a dedicated portal is another word you'll hear, some more of like a browser tab. Just, you have your credentials and you log in there. Another thing that I implore everyone, please figure out what that method is. Log in today and play around in there. Take 10 minutes to figure out, I'm not going to file the claim, but what if I had to? Because those call times get significant, and they get significant quick. The more you know how to file now, and I know that there's also issues with power after storms.
Yeah.
So you might have issues getting onto a portal. Your internet service might be out. These are things we're aware of. So a call might be your best option, and be prepared to wait. You'll hear this, and I don't mean this in jest, but you hear this a lot from insurance folks. When there's a cat, it's kind of like trying to buy Christmas gifts last day, and I know it's not a similar experience, so please don't take it that way. But I just mean there's going to be hold times. There's going to be long waits, and that's not us trying to make you wait or any carrier trying to make you wait. It's a numbers game. There's a lot of calls, and we take each one very seriously. We don't want to rush people off the phone. We want to get them to great people like Jeff, who can help them with the repair process, and that takes time. So I think that in these months, hurricane season's here, but fingers crossed it's still the slow time. Take these weeks to really log in, know what your plan is, and have that plan, and go through it with your family. If you have a wife or a partner or older kids, make sure they know that plan, because you may all need to step up and take different roles, and we don't want you to be stressed out when that moment comes.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be intimidated by the technology side of it. We've watched our insurance industry get faster and faster each storm. So when you get the information submitted online, I know that each year we get the TARP list, and all that information comes so much quicker than it did even in 2017, and then the 22s. And anyway, so I wouldn't be intimidated by that. I would be encouraged and know when you get them the information, it's getting to our team super fast, and then you don't have to worry about it. But if you have to wait on hold, sure. But I would encourage people to take advantage of the online.
Yeah.
Even if you're giving it to your mother-in-law who's sitting in Chicago,
Yeah.
you could blast that email off. She can get online and get it over to you.
Good
Because
point.
even when you have cell phone service, if you're in the cone, sometimes your internet's not going to work.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
And Jeff, what's the kind of timing look like, right? So let's just take a roof replacement claim, right? So really no interior damage, but just an average Milton type storm, right? What does that look like from storm hits? What was that, October 9th, right?
Right.
And what does that look like to tarp, to adjusters, to roof replacement permits? What's your process on that?
absolutely. So let's say you did your homework. You know who your carrier is. You've reported the claim. Depending on their claims process, they'll have preferred vendors, right? So we get the TARP assignment. Expect the TARP vendor to show up 24 or 72 hours. And then and know this, the context is we're trying to dry in everybody, right? So we're not going to put the tarp on and then tear your roof off the next day. Our goal is to get you, your neighbor, the community, everybody dried in. So there's less secondary damages. You can stay in your home. And so let's make sure the whole community's been secured. And then after that, depending on your roof covering, if it's a shingle roof covering, it can happen pretty quick. 30, 90 days, depending on the severity of the event.
Yeah.
Milton, in contrast to Ian, right? We flew through Milton, but the severity was a lot lower. So that's a broad brush, but I would say take it by first, let's get the houses dried in, and then we can, depending on the permitting and all that fun stuff, we should be moving pretty quick on a Milton, using that as an example.
Awesome. And Glenn, this one is to you. This is a question on a condo. So it kind of had three primary layers of coverage as to talking about it is dwelling and contents, loss of use, and then the big one, loss assessment coverage. Can you kind of walk somebody through, what those three, categories are and how they work?
Absolutely. So I think I'll take them in that order. So dwelling and contents, I would call those core coverages for a condo. Now, condos, the wrinkle that a condo has that a standalone home does not have is that there's a layer of coordination. I know a lot of this sounds like homework, and I hope no one leaves this call thinking, me, Jake, and Jeff are giving you guys a lot of work to do. That's certainly not our intent. I think that this is a highly educational space, and we want to share that, be very transparent. So why I start there is with a condo, knowing your condo bylaws. And that might be a term that people are hearing for the first time. I hope not, but if it is, I'm glad it came up because it's very important to know what your condo covers. Now, it's a song and dance, meaning that the condo association owes part, and you are responsible for part. When I say you, that's why you take out a condo policy. Most dwelling, by default, you'll hear the term walls in. So you'll hear drywall finishes and in is the unit owner's responsibility. Anything finishes out is going to be the condo association's responsibility. Now, that's a broad brush. I've seen condos that the unit owner does owe for the roof. I would not say that that's common, but I don't want to assign even a percentage to that because they are a song and dance, and there's many things involved there, like what is your HOA association fee, and all these things matter. So my major takeaway there is look at your bylaws, request those at the next board meeting, send an email if you have a contact, and understand that because that's going to affect how your claim goes. Now, one of the first things your adjuster is going to ask for, copy of those bylaws. If you have that on hand, I can't tell you how far ahead of the game you are just to start. Now, contents are a lot easier with a condo. They're a lot like a homeowner's policy in that you are responsible for your contents, and your policy will have contents coverage. Now, the main thing that you want to look at there is your contents coverage sufficient, and that gets a little broader than just condos. I think homeowners want to look at that. Hey, if I lost everything in this house, would I have enough coverage for that? So I think that paints a good picture of those coverages. The next one you asked about was
Loss of use.
Loss of use. So loss of use, again, very similar to a homeowner policy. Loss of use, when we hear that term, what are we thinking? The traditional term that people think of, if I need to go into a hotel. I always say that loss of use can extend a lot further than that. Let's say that your hotel is now 30 miles out because it's a very flooded area. That might mean mileage. That might mean pet fees. That might the hotel might not allow pets. Now you need to board your pets. Loss of use is going to include all of that. And what I tell people is ask your carrier. If you're incurring a cost post-loss that you were not bearing pre-loss, submit it. I've seen people submit things like Wi-Fi because now the new place doesn't have a great Wi-Fi connection. They needed to buy a router to keep working. Very niche case. Most hotels have that, but there are things that people don't think of asking. Another one I see is, well, what if I can stay at my house, but I need a generator? Ask your adjuster because we want to make your life easy. There are situations where an on-site RV might make sense. Now, these are very case specific, and I'm not trying to say, well, hey, the next time you have a loss, you're going to get an RV. If that makes sense, that might be an option. So loss of use is going to look so different for each person, and it's going to be very storm dependent. I hope that gives everyone a good understanding of what that could look like. The last one I think is another PSA. If I could give you another, I feel like I'm giving so many assignments here, but this is all good stuff for everyone to take away. Loss assessment. Most condo policies by default have $1,000 in loss assessment coverage. Now, that can be wildly insufficient in some cases. And I'm not trying to scare anybody here, but the cost to increase your loss assessment coverage is often very, very minimal. And when I say that, we can sometimes talk about $40 a year can get you $10,000 in coverage. And you might look at me, and Jake and Jeff next year and go, well, I bought it and I didn't need it. Very possible, but that's what insurance is. It's transferring that risk. So just like the flood, we said, I encourage you to get a quote. Everyone here, I encourage you to look at what increasing your loss assessment limit would look like, because I saw a lot of scenarios after Milton, Helene, Ian, you name the storm, where people were getting $25,000 loss assessments and they only had $1,000 in coverage. And I don't want anyone here to have that unless they weighed the risk and went, I knew the risk and I made that decision. I'm going to self-insure. That's okay, but know what that's going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, within that, I think one of the things that I'm hearing on this, right, is your adjuster is your advocate, right? The adjuster is there to help put you in pre-loss condition. And so, talk to the adjuster and really, like you said, ask, right? Kind of in many cases expect to know, right? But if you don't ask, you don't know. And often, to the carrier, if it's $2,500 or $5,000 for a generator versus, $5,000 a month for, a rental, it financially puts you in the same place, and most would rather be in their own home. And so, but that's where it's really just, allowing that adjuster to do their job, which is advocating, for you and for your coverage.
Yep. Well said, Jake.
So next one, Glenn, is hurricane deductibles. So in Florida, we typically have 2 deductibles on the policy, right? Our all other perils, typically flat dollar, say $1,000 or $2,500, and then we've got our hurricane deductible, which is typically 2, 3, or 5%. Sure. How does that work? And is that percentage of claim, which is a question that I think a lot of people have, or is that a percentage of dwelling? And is it one deductible for every storm, or is it each storm having that 2 or 5%?
Sure. So I think just one layer removed. I really appreciate everyone submitting these questions. I think very thoughtful. I think that even if you weren't the one thinking of these, I think you can benefit from exploring, what's going on here. But with that question, they're mostly, and I say the vast majority of policies are based on the coverage A limit. So when you hear a percentage deductible, it's going to be based off the coverage A limit, coverage A being the dwelling. With that, to paint a picture, because I do think numbers are helpful here, and I never like to go too deep into math, but I think it's just helpful to give yourself some frame of reference. Let's say an average home is $400,000. just as an example here, a 2% deductible there is going to be $8,000. And I won't go farther than that, but we can all scale it. If it's 400,000, 5%, that's $20,000. And you can do that math yourself, just rudimentary calculations. But I think that's very helpful for you to understand, hey, if I had to tap into 20,000 or 8,000 or whatever that number might be, I think that becomes a good safety net that you want to have on hand, because the last thing you want to face amongst all the storms is am I going to be able to fix my house, or am I going to now face secondary damages due to not having that money on hand? I know times are tough. That is not the lens I'm going through here, and never to be disrespectful. But just think about what that would mean to your family and really have that thought going in. Now, why I start there is the next important part. I talked about loss assessment. Sometimes the change in adding that coverage being a negligible amount of money. Now, in the past, and not to go into the past because we're in the present and the future, but a couple of years ago, changing your deductible from 2 to 1% or from 5 to 2 would have been an enormous amount of money. That would have meant doubling your policy. In some cases, oh my gosh, tripling, just something ungodly, really, really a high amount. But I think the market, as everyone has hopefully seen, has had a positive stabilization period. I would encourage you to really get a quote. What would it mean if you have a 5% deductible to go down to 2 down to 1, because it's all about risk tolerance. That's a theme within insurance, is you pay money and hopefully you never use it. Hopefully it's money that you just pay and you're like, I have peace of mind. You're buying peace of mind. I would really encourage anyone who's a customer of Jake, quote that. Get that quote. That's a very easy quote for them to run. And that number might not mean that much. Maybe it's a couple $100 and you go, wow, if I have a storm and I'm only out of pocket $4,000 instead of $20,000, that's going to let me sleep at night. Pull the trigger on that. Or, you know what? Money's really tight. I'm not going to do that. But just make sure information is power. And I think that's a really good lens for that question. So really, really great question.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add into that is on a policy, almost everything can be changed midterm except the hurricane deductible, right? And so the carriers don't allow us as an agent to move that hurricane deductible, or else on June 1st, everybody's 1%, and on November 30th, they go back to a 10%. And so as a result, that's something that you want to look at actively with your renewal cycles.
And if I could, Jake, just because half that question I didn't answer. The other half was, is it a per storm or a calendar year deductible is the term you'll hear a lot. Many policies, and I'm intentionally never going to say all policies are this, some, because of course someone will have that one policy that's the opposite. Many policies are calendar year deductibles, meaning that when you had Milton and Helene, let's say you had enormous winds, which some pockets did, particularly the I-4 corridor. Let's say on your first storm you incurred an $8,000 deductible, and then we all know a week later you're hitting that second storm. Most policies will say you've met your calendar year deductible, and you would not incur a second deductible on that second storm. I don't want people to take that if now in this season, over a year later or over a calendar year later, they do, it will reset. So that, I'm sorry that happens to people, it does, but most times it is a calendar year deductible.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one is really for both of you, and it's on trees. So trees, especially in the center part of the state, can become a really big challenge. So the first one is neighbor's tree falls on my property. Who's responsible and what are my rights?
Do you want to take that one first, Jeff?
Yes. I mean, you're still responsible for your property. Whether you liked your neighbor pre or post tree fall, you still want to reach out to your carrier, your broker immediately. And especially in the tree fall scenario, like, we don't want to take on secondary damages. We don't want to leave your roofing system open to weather, pest, all the different things. So my initial answer would be take care of your property. Let's get the tree off the house. Let's get it covered up. And then obviously your carrier will kick in for there. If you want to take that part of the coverage part of it.
Sure, absolutely. So I think that something that Jeff's pointed out there that's important is having a contractor like Jeff in mind. I think that's your foundation, is think about that now, and have that reservoir of contacts, because listen, I know that Jeff's company does good work, and there's companies like his that do good work. Trees and tarps are quickly tapped out assets after a storm, and it's not because they don't want to help you. I'd recommend trying to have two in mind, because you may be making 2 calls and they're not disregarding you. It's never that. There's a lot of work to go around, and that's the first asset, along with mitigation, which I'm not going to bring in here, but water mitigation is a term you'll hear a lot after water entry. Those assets get tapped out very quickly. That 24 to 72 hours can quickly become 7 days, and it can become very scary. So I recommend having two resources, an A and a B. But with that, trees are a very hot issue, and this is a very good picture I can paint. When you have a tree on your neighbor's property that's an issue, what you'll hear a lot in insurance is, let's say it's a dead tree, a very obvious tree that should come down. I recommend that you first ask your neighbor, hey, can you get your tree trimmed before hurricane season? Let's say they're not responsive, they're giving you I'm not going to do that. Send a certified letter. Notice the word I used there. I did not say send a letter. I said send a certified letter to your neighbor so you have a record of putting them on notice. That will become very important later if a carrier has to go after your neighbor. And I know when you start to hear that, you think, oh my gosh, it's going to hurt my neighbor and it's going to hurt relations. That's why I started with give them a friendly notice, a knock on the door. Hey, that tree's getting a little overgrown. Look, it's hollow. There's ants in it. It's infested. It's dead. Give them a chance to get rid of it. But that's not something that you want to just let go and go. Well, hey, I told them. You got to have proof that you've put them on notice. So if a neighbor's not responding to you and you've done so kindly, I recommend sending that certified letter, because when you provide that to us and you have a record of delivery, that will allow us to, in a lot of cases, potentially go after your neighbor and recover your deductible as well as what was paid, which may feed into further questions here. The first part, though, is if a tree comes down during a hurricane or a wind event, which are the primary causes of trees coming down, in many cases, I can't think of any, where you will not have coverage to get that off your home.
Yeah.
The second part becomes a little more policy specific, and that becomes debris removal. You'll hear the term chop and drop a lot on the insurance carrier side. And chop and drop means we want to chop the tree off the covered structure, your home, your garage, and get it on the ground. On the ground can mean an alley, the yard. Once it's on the ground, it is off the house. That's where coverage will become very specific to the policy. Some policies have debris removal coverage, some don't. You want to look at your policy and understand, hey, if a 50-foot oak comes down and they put that in my yard, I can tell you guys, and Jeff would second this, I imagine, that can be thousands of dollars to get off your property. Now, if you're the type of person that's going to chop it up yourself and throw it in the fire pit when the time comes, by all means, take your time with it. If you're the person that wants it off your property, that can be a lot of money and labor to get that chopped up tree off the house. So sorry if that went a little long, but I think that you get it off the house. Most policies cover that once it's in the yard. Debris removal coverage is what you want to look at, and most policies label that as an additional coverage.
And I'll kind of give you a follow-up on that is, let's say it doesn't hit the house, right? And so we had a lot of these, I think it was Ian, and so trees just collapse in the yard. It's not blocking your access to the house, but you've got a $25,000 to $50,000 tree service bill. Is there coverage there?
Great question, Jake. And I think you introduced one other item that I'm glad came up, and you talked about access. So just another very policy-specific item. Some policies say if the tree hits your home, hits a covered structure or blocks access to the home, we will allow removal. We will allow that chop and drop process. So they'll still chop it up if, let's say, it's covering the front door or making an area unsafe to enter the home, and they'll put that in the yard. Most policies will have that delineation of chopped up into the yard. So let's say access is covered. I would implore everyone look at that, because that's a key difference in coverage. And I'll be honest, that is usually carrier specific. I'm not aware of many carriers that will say, well, you can add back the access component of that. So take a look at that. But let's get that part out. Tree is not blocking access. It has not hit a covered structure. It's in the yard. Maybe you have acreage and it's just in the middle of the 4 acres you have, whatever it might be. Most policies are not going to cover to remove a tree that has not hit a covered structure. To bring one more wrinkle into that, let's say it hits your fence, but only a portion of that tree is on the fence. It will owe to get it off that portion of the fence, and you can have a large tree bill if it's just in the yard. I know Jake threw a number out there, $50,000, and some of you might go, oh my God, what's a $50,000 tree look like? A huge oak. We've seen water oaks that are those hollow oaks that everyone has that fall. They rot quite frequently. I recommend looking at where are the trees in relation to your property. Protect your house first, but be prepared. Am I going to chop that up myself? Am I going to rent a chainsaw? Am I going to have a community party where we all chip in? There's a lot of options, but make sure that if it's not on something that you're just prepared that might be a bill that you have to face.
Yeah.
And some of the quick takeaways, not to be intimidated by trees, is one, be very careful because trees are the most dangerous part. When it's on the roofing system, please don't. I mean, be very careful jumping on the roof system because your decking could be split. You don't want to fall, land in the truss system. And let's say you've got your arborist there, they're getting it off the house. So as I understand it, right, we can get it off the house, but hauling is a different part of the conversation. So ask your arborist when they're there, hey, can you get it to the road? Because after your cat, they're doing federally, they're coming in and getting it off the roadside. So no, that might be a different policy limit to get it off the roof and then get it to the roadside. But when you have the talent that's at your house, ask them, hey, what else? What's the additional fee to get it to the road? Because that can be a huge difference for you in hauling opposed to you taking it to the dump 90 days later.
A really good point. Yeah, and I think that a lot of municipalities, like Jeff said, they're going to help you. They're going to try to help out the community. They're going to rerun in trucks, but you got to have those trees chopped up and accessible. And I know that some municipalities, I'm in Hillsborough, anecdotally, they were great. They were even going to the middle of the front yard. So they were really trying to help. Pending that your area has access, power lines and all that. But the more you can do to get that tree off safely, which if you haven't chopped the tree up before and the first time you're going to do it is when it's on a roof truss, do not make that the first time you do that. Safety is everything after a storm. I do not want anybody to leave this going, yeah, the money was a lot, so I'm going to do that myself. That can be a very scary situation, and I'm not putting that in light. None of us would do that. Make sure that you're using professionals because it can be very tricky work.
Yeah, absolutely. So next one on here, and I'll kind of start this one is, should I file a smaller claim or will it raise my rates? And I'm going to kind of give a two-part answer on this, right? So the first is non-hurricane claims. Those can raise your rates, right? And so what we typically recommend is, hey, if you're not sure if it's going to hit the deductible, call a reputable restoration contractor. Our office has, quite a few we can refer you to. Let them come out and look at it. Often what seems like $8,000 is $800. But you don't know that until you have the contractor come look at it. And if that's the case and your deductible is $2,500, probably would fix it. If they come out and your deductible is $2,500 and the loss is going to be $25,000, that's why you buy insurance, right? And so even if your rate goes up a little bit, let's just call it 10%, that only lasts for 3 years, and you're way better off for it. On a hurricane side, we had quite a few that were below deductible hurricane losses, right? And so what we found is one. I'd say 99% of carriers do not rate prior wind claims, right? That's an act of God. There's really nothing you as an insured can do to prevent it. And it starts to chip away at that hurricane deductible, right? And so as Glenn was talking about earlier, you've got that calendar year hurricane deductible. It starts to chip away at that. The one caution that I throw in there is, if there is damage and it's either above deductible or below deductible, often about 12 months later, the carrier will memo and just want to see proof of repair, right? Because they still want to make sure that they're insuring a good roof. And so if you file a roof claim, you just have to make sure that you are really going to fix it, but you're going to do that regardless. But that's just kind of the caution that I would give people on that. And so speaking of claims on there, and I'll start this and then turn it over to Jeff, is should I hire a public adjuster? And this is what I'm going to call the hotbed question, that if you go on the Nextdoor app and if you go on Facebook, everybody has a different opinion of it. I think what I'll say on that, and really in the experience that we have as an agency, is 99% of claims go really well. 1% do not, and those are typically the ones that you hear about. But I think as you're hearing Glenn here, the claims adjuster is your friend. They are here to pay you what should be paid within the policy, and whether that's the carrier claims adjuster or a public adjuster. The thing about the public adjuster is you're going to give up 10% of your claim. And so what we saw often, and I'll use a flood example, is in the NFIP, you have a $250,000 policy limit. The person was going to get $250,000 from the NFIP adjuster, but they used a public adjuster as well, and now they get $225,000. And so that 10% doesn't raise your limits as to what the carrier is going to pay you. And so I think what our encouragement is, there's certain times where, yeah, maybe a public adjuster is needed if there really is a dispute between insured and carrier. However, in the 99% where that's not the case, work with your carrier, let them come out and do their job. And if for some reason there's a dispute, start with asking, hey, can I talk to the claims supervisor? And allow the claims supervisor to hear you. And if that still doesn't go anywhere, talk to us, right? Let your agent be your advocate. And if that still doesn't go anywhere, maybe that is time to use a public adjuster for a second opinion. But I can say I've seen many simple claims turn non-simple by the involvement of a public adjuster when there really didn't need to be one. Jeff, any thoughts?
That was a beautiful, graceful answer. I'm like, all right, I'm going to answer this like I'm talking to my cousins, like as honestly as I can. And I wrote it down. My initial answer was call your carrier first. Let them do their job. You're already paying for the policy. If there's something lost in communication, that was my next point. Call your broker. Get everybody on the same page, because there's not a real reason to give away 10% if everybody's like to your point. I've seen plenty of roofs we're on that are covered. We're going out to do our job, and then public adjusters get brought in, and it's really sad because I've seen where a claim is covered, and depending on your contract, and this goes for anybody on that's working a claim from that side, you should know what you're signing. Mm-hmm. How are they getting paid, right? Like, could it be a covered claim, and now the policyholder has to pay an attorney or a PA $20,000 for a roof that was already being replaced? So I would encourage you to yes, let the policy do what it's supposed to do first, and then even if you entertain it, know what you're signing. Because there's nothing. I've seen it a handful of times, and it's super sad when we're putting on this roof, and the insurance like, can you help me? I have to pay this guy $20,000. I don't know. What'd you sign? So ask questions and let the people who you've already hired through the policy do their job first.
Yeah. And I'll give an example. It's a non-hurricane claim, but we had a claim in our office last week, and customer got a denial on it, and we looked at it with the denial, and in our opinion, it should have been a covered loss. And so we reached out to a claims supervisor at the carrier. Supervisor looked at it and said, yeah, we need to take a second look at this, and ended up making payment on there. And so, there are just things that get lost in communication sometimes. But I would say, claims adjusters are there to help you. And so allow that carrier adjuster to start, because at the end of the day, the public adjuster still has to work with the carrier adjuster. So it's not like you get a different adjusting panel, and it still has to be an approved claim. And so that's kind of our view on it. So Jeff, next one to you is, storm comes. How do I pick a roofing contractor after a storm? And are there any red flags to watch for?
So first, you should have your contractors picked before the storm. And that's on an annual basis, right? Even for daily claims. I don't want to be looking for who's going to come dry my house out if the sink floods. So one, before the storm. And then two, the beauty of looking, and the carriers do a marvelous job now where they have preferred vendors, right? You might put a roof on a couple times in a lifetime. Your carrier is doing quality control and watching companies like mine work 365 days a year. So I think it's a great vetting system to know, okay, well, who's Glenn going to say should tarp my roof? And it has been watching them perform cat after cat. So one, go to your carrier, see who their preferred vendor. And that also helps in the communication point, because when Glenn sends me to your roof, we're going to put the tarp on, we're going to collect the documentation, and it flows right to them. So it's super advantageous to use your carrier preferred vendors, because it helps the claim move faster. The documentation goes back to the desk adjuster instantaneously. So there's a lot of advantages to that, to the communication point that we keep revisiting. And then beyond that, let's say your carrier doesn't have a preferred vendor list, which is rare, but if it did, then I would look at, because you still, in my mind, you want somebody who's been credentialed, somebody who's been observed by Florida licensing. Great, that's a good starting point. But also, okay, are they credentialed with GAF and the manufacturers? Essentially, some third party who's been watching them work and will stand behind them. They'll give them the Master Elite from GAF, the vendors will say, yes, this is a company we trust to send out. And know this too, after the storm happens, every contractor in the country is trying to pour in. So do your due diligence. If it's fly by night comes by in a truck, where's your insurance? Where's your licensing? Even if you're in that desperate situation, my roof's gone, this truck just pulled up, you still don't want to let them on your roof if they're not licensed and they're not insured, because that could bring on more liability. So if you're in that situation, I have no power. My roofing system's gone. There's an F-150 in front with a tarp. They should still be able to say, yes, here's our proof of insurance, and then maybe proceed cautiously.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, shameless plug for Southern Safe, right? So you guys talk about credentials. What credentials do you guys have?
So there's a handful. So in a roofing capacity, we've got our GAF Master Elite, which less than 2% of your roofing contractors in Florida carry. And then specifically in the wind space, we're fortified. We're a fortified contractor. We specialize in uplift and hardening homes. So we're huge proponents of mitigation, wind and flood. So those would be for roofing specific. Those would be the first two I'd throw out.
Yeah. So really, JF Master Elite. That's going to be the pinnacle stamp of best of the best.
Absolutely. And to go back to working with your carrier, we also Master Elite. We can offer the richest retail warranty, and also when you work with the preferred vendor list, we give 10-year workmanship, which the retail world, it's not common.
Yeah.
But when you work with a company that's vetted and understands the value of leaving you with an improved risk when we're done, that's the type of benefits you get with it. And the carrier as well, they want to keep us accountable to our work.
Yeah.
So everybody wins. So the stakeholders, everybody's working the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So next one to you, Jeff, is best hurricane prep ideas and ways to prevent water intrusion. And I'll kind of combine it with the follow-up question to that was what caulk or tape works best, and tape inside, outside, or both?
Okay. All right, we'll start with where do we start? Address your openings. So windows, garage doors, and we could do that via the impact windows, shutters, and all that should be purchased and planned before cat season, right? Plenty of options. There's the metal hangers that you've seen, the more of your low-cost entry, is all the way to getting Miami-Dade windows. That would be the first part. Second part would be inspect your roof and overhangs. So to revisit trees, we're not scared of trees. We're going to mitigate trees. And to me, with wind, even in a non-wind, that's one of the biggest cause of claims that could be prevented. So pay a professional to traverse your roof. If you're comfortable doing it, get after it. But walk your roof. Make sure you don't have any loose or missing shingles, roof tiles, right? Because the way wind works is once it blows the garage door, now we have negative pressure. So we're trying to prevent it from getting in. Same things when you get on top of the roof. Let's make sure we don't have any missing material, and you can get it addressed before the storm. Let's see here. And then we were talking about tape. That tape makes me, I'm like so mad at tape as we're talking about. I'm like, don't, tape is not going to help. Because I've even seen tape, if you see an opening, please don't use tape as if it's going to be, temporary flashing. If you see a problem in your valley or any type of opening, call a professional, get it addressed, get it properly sealed, okay? Now, if you do see, let's say in siding, you see some type of something that needs to be sealed, use a polyurethane, caulking, and even, we all have the internet now. If you go to Home Depot, there'll be some type of stucco caulk specific application. So use a material that's designed to go on it. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think so.
Very cool.
So next one on here is does a whole home generator help with insurance? And so I'll kind of jump into this on a rating perspective. So from a rate perspective, I would say 99% of carriers do not have a generator credit. But where we really saw it make an impact was, loss of use coverage only kicks in if your house is unlivable due to a hurricane putting a hole in your roof or something along those lines. Your house being uncomfortable because you don't have power with no damage, that's not an insurance claim. And so with a generator, it allows many people to stay in their house and to stay in comfortably especially when you have August and September Florida temperatures. And so I think that it's really done as a comfort, but not necessarily a, either rate credit or claim credit. Do you have any?
Yeah, no, I think you outlined kind of the parameters there, Jake. But I'd say the one item I'd add is peace of mind is a consistent theme we bring up. I think having a generator, there are things that can come up there like spoiled food, which some policies have coverage for. Some of us have deep freezers, multiple fridges. I think it gives you that peace of mind. I think that a situation that may not be something that you would be willing to stay in now with a generator, you are. And I think that it can sometimes help with secondary damages. Obviously, the home being 90, 80, high 80 degrees can lead to secondary issues over time. So I think that's very helpful. But yeah, I'm not aware of any direct credit there that would apply yet either.
Okay. And next one on here, and I'll go to Jeff on this one, is sandbags. So somebody's in a flood zone, flood water is expected. Do sandbags really make that big of a difference?
I'm a huge fan of sandbags for a multitude of reasons. So one, yeah, the garage door, use the sandbags. They help minimize the water damage tremendously. And then a few of the applications you might not think of is after a ton of rain and runoff, the sandbags can be helpful for diverting rain, right? So how's the neighbors' gutters overflow? Now we've got this water that we weren't planning on. It can help divert it and safely get it to the road or wherever the runoff needs to go.
Awesome.
Fan of sandbags.
Yeah. And then, Jeff, next one on here, and I think this one changed in 2023, right, is repair versus replace. So Hurricane Ian was in 2022. And my understanding, and I could be completely wrong on this, is Hurricane Ian, if a roof is 25% or greater damaged, then statute requires that it's a replacement on there. And then in the 2023 reforms, that went to 50% as long as the roof meets Florida building code.
Correct. So, and if I'm you, and I'm like, well, how do I feel about that? 2007, all re-roofs started to get re-nailed on your deck. So your roof deck has uplift has been improved. So the 25% rule is now out of the window for homes that have already been re-nailed. So that allows us to come in and do repairs, and you already have an FBC uplift rating. So you're not really losing, you don't have a lesser system. We're just replacing what has been displaced opposed to re-nailing it again because you're already at the new building code. So the 25% rule is gone post 07 permitted re-roofs. And I would feel very comfortable about that because it's already been addressed during the last roof installation.
And it's crazy enough, right? 2007 is 19 years ago, right? And so the way I think about that is really pretty much every shingle roof, right, is a 15 to 20 year lifespan. So almost 100% of shingle roofs should be that way. And probably 50% of metal and tile, just from a lifespan perspective, is kind of there. So the next one on here is, do extra roof staples count as added protection for insurance? So I'm going to say this is probably putting your inspector hat on, right? And that's roof deck attachment or roof to wall attachment. And what is that and how does that work?
So if they meant in a literal sense staples to the deck, the answer is no. The Florida Building Code requires us to use the AD ring shank, and all of this is based off of engineered uplift ratings. So staples are not going to help you in any capacity. And also disclaimer, if somebody shows up to put a tarp on and they have a ton of simplexes or staples, stop. Do not expand the scope of damage, please.
Yeah.
Well put.
Absolutely. And so, Jeff, this one is on your contractor hat. And this is one we ran into a lot in 2024 in specific neighborhoods in St. Pete, the 50% rule.
Yes.
Can you bring some light into what is the 50% rule? And how does it work, and how does it affect the claim?
Okay, and we'll kick this one around the table. So the way that works is the value of the home, not the dirt. If the project is going to require 50% of that value, we cannot pull a permit because then it goes into the substantial damage.
And that's if it doesn't meet current floodplain, right? So typically that's going to be a slab on grade type house, right? And so
yes,
and so you've got. The tax record says $600,000, but the building value is $300,000, and so now your permit cap is $150,000.
Correct. Correct, and it is beyond, as I understand it, and the way we've interacted with this, it's when it becomes substantial damage, it's the flood elevation and the building code. So that goes to your continual load path, whatever the engineering standard is for the entire dwelling.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
But I know, as we've worked with homeowners, because it's important that you have the right value to the property. We had one. It was actually in the Panhandle years ago, where it initially didn't meet the standard, but when they got the proper value it was a beautiful home that was in a marina on the water. But when they got that, then it was kosher because they got the right value. Does anybody want to speak to that, making sure that part of it's accurate?
Yeah, and so typically what happens is after a loss, right, the city will send you a letter, and the letter says, hey, we estimate your damage is above or below 50%. And if it comes in above, they do give you the right to appeal. So you can hire an appraiser. First thing the appraiser says is, can I get some photos? So that goes back to that photo discussion, right?
Yeah.
And you can appeal it. And the 50% rule, I think that frustrated a lot of people because they felt like they were being kicked out of their house by the government, right? And I think the challenge is the rule is really there to protect you, right, from putting hundreds of thousands of dollars into a house that's likely to flood again. And my understanding, Jeff, is it really only applies to homes in a flood zone, or is it all homes that applies to?
We've only dealt with it in the flood zone.
Yeah.
So
it's just an extra wrinkle if you're in that mandatory purchase zone that begins with A or V, is to know about the 50% rule and then know what your values are. But one thing that we've had many people do that need to cross the 50% rule is either elevate the house, right? And so there's multiple companies that will come and actually lift it, or they take their existing foundation, they leave that, and they build on top of it. So we've seen that as a way around the 50% rule, but it's definitely a challenging one out there.
as you're talking about, I'm like, these are great things to know now, and also for the future home, your retirement home you're thinking of moving on the water. These are questions to ask, and that data is out there before you make a purchase.
Absolutely.
So super helpful.
And so last one, and this one I'm not quite sure what the question's asking, but hopefully the roofing hat on you can know, is what's the strip on some roofs that keeps debris out, and does it devalue the roof?
So I'm going to get creative on my answer because there's lots of strips on a roofing assembly, but I think you're referring to the to your ridge vents, and I'll go back to what do we do pre-cat. Make sure you're not missing any of your roofing components. Make sure you're not missing any tiles, and it's not going to devalue the roof. It's actually there to help with the air exchanges. It's part of the Florida building code. We have to use them. And also, don't forget about your overhangs, your soffit, your fascia board. All that's going to be greatly affected by wind and uplift. And it's gonna help your decking. Your roof is going to say thank you when you make sure your soffits are sealed and everything's doing its job so that we can mitigate wind as much as possible. So roofing strips are good. I'm guessing we're talking about your ridge vents.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, those are really all the the pre-submitted questions on here, and so really appreciate your guys' time. Any closing remarks for you guys on this?
Sure. So I would just have one because I think it came up quite a bit. Is how do you find a good contractor? I think was a question that was asked in many forms, and I think it's a good test of your agent. I think it's a good test of your carrier. Have those conversations now. Build up that Rolodex. And I know Jeff would say this. I know any good contractor would say this. We encourage you to seek out referrals, reviews. Look at those licensing. Those are all things that are easily found on the internet. So I think that doing that work and letting your agent work for you, because I know that Jake would rather have that conversation in May, June than you're calling him the day of a storm. Hey, I need a tarping contractor. It's going to be very difficult not only for him to get to that call, but to then get you somebody who's reputable and available. So I think. Jeff also talked about how you'll have these kind of fly-by-night or these drive-by contractors, never trying to say that these people, some of them are trying to help. They're just out there trying to do good work, but be very mindful of what you're signing, because we all have nightmare stories of someone signing up a public adjuster or signing a document that then allows that company to do additional things. Public adjusters, some contracts say they allow to then go to an attorney, or you must use certain mitigation services, you must use certain contractors. When you see someone taking you down a path where you must do certain things and you're losing control, I think that's a chance to just step back and say, is this in my best interest? You want to feel comfortable with the process, and when things don't feel right, they often aren't right. So I think that this is really transparency. I've worked only for carriers. I would say that when you work with a contractor, you should not feel like they are forcing you to work with them. You should feel like you are voluntarily working with them. And whenever that shifts, it's a chance to say, is this in my best interest? And I think that's a really guiding lens for everything we've talked about today.
Yeah, and one thing I'll throw in there that I kind of thought about as you were talking is one of the other things that we see, this is more on flood policies, but we had quite a few where the NFIP contract, typically I think that their dry out schedule is around $12 to $15 a square foot. And many of the show up at your door contractors were at $30 and $50 a square foot. And so you've just had one of the worst days of your life of your house flooding. And on a 2,000 square foot house, now you owe an additional $20,000 beyond what the policy pays. And so really, any work like that, if it's not done in coordination with your claims adjuster, there might not be coverage for it in general, but there also might not be coverage to the dollar amount charged. And if you sign that contract, you could be on the hook for that. And so we unfortunately saw quite a few people get taken advantage of on that.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's not a adversarial relationship. I am a contractor that is paid by homeowners and carriers. But the very special thing about where we serve is I feel like we're all working in the same direction. Our goal is to get our homeowners back to pre-loss as fast as possible and leave them with a better risk than we started with, right? And so we're all working the same direction. And I guess my send-off as we tie it all together is know that we are your team that is working together. So when the relationship starts, love your broker, ask them questions. Listen, I grew up in construction. There's plenty of words that have been thrown over this table. I don't know what they mean, and that's okay. Like, ask, what is coverage A? Like when you're going through it with Jake and his team, ask questions. I ask a lot of questions, and I would rather what you're paying for, be as prepared as possible, and then after the storm, we can all work together to get you back to pre-loss. So, to your point, whether it's the dry out, the tarp, or any of it, it shouldn't feel adversarial. You are paying for the surface. Jake is happy to work with you. Jake, I'm so sorry. Your team is happy to give him the pre-loss. So I would say use that advantage, build your roller decks, and build these relationships because we're all working together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, really appreciate your time, guys. And, to all our clients, we really appreciate your business. And hopefully this is a nice little educational piece on the front end of a very quiet hurricane season. But if it's not quiet, hopefully this helps prepare you. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jake.